Rocky wanna play?
Look at me, Damien. It's all for you.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
They're here.
Welcome, everyone, to the second episode of the Gruesome Task podcast. My name is Deonte, and I'm here with my host, Jose. Go ahead and say hello to the people, Jose.
What's up, everybody? I am ready to go. Let's get the second week started. I'm very excited.
Yes, I'm very excited as well. I want to thank everyone for all the support that they gave us during the first week. It was very overwhelming, not expected, but we appreciate it all, and we look forward to the weeks to come.
Yes, exactly. I am overwhelmed with the amount of support we've had so far, and I look forward to this growing and continuing this with you all.
Yes, and before we do jump into anything, if you're not already, you can follow us on Instagram at Gruesome Task Podcast, on Twitter at The Gruesome Task, where you can listen to the podcast on Podbean, which we are Gruesome Task Podcast at podbean.com. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, as well as Apple Podcast. Now, where can they find you out on social media, Jose?
I am on Twitter at thatguyjose. It's DATGUYJOSE. And I'm also on Instagram, j.a.gallegos, GALLEGOS.
Perfect. And you can find me on Instagram at xdeontems. That is XDEONTEMS. And on Twitter at _under the knife. Now, before we jump into the movie that we're going to be talking about today, I think you have a little bit of an announcement to give the people.
Yes, if you don't follow us on social media, like we just mentioned before, well, we posted that we're partnering with Horror Pack. This is a monthly subscription service that sends you out 4 DVDs or Blu-rays every month for I believe the Blu-ray is $24.99 and the DVD subscription is $19.99. I'm subscribed to this personally for a couple months now, and I'm excited with the movies I've gotten. They're great movies, and I'm looking forward to the next shipment that's coming out pretty soon. But if you want to subscribe, we have a discount code, and that is going to be ITFOLLOWS, ITFOLLOWS, and that it'll save you about $3 off both subscriptions there.
Very, very cool and crazy that we've been given that opportunity just after one episode, but we look forward to more opportunities in the future, and we wouldn't be in that position to be able to do something like that without all of you guys' support. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you guys very, very much. We are looking to build this as far as it can go. We're very fortunate that we did get this partnership so early on, and to give you guys the opportunity to look into horror titles as well.
Yes. And with horror titles, I think it's a great time to go ahead and announce, if you have not seen it on Instagram already, the movie that we are going to be doing this week is none other than 1992's Candyman.
They will say that I have shed innocent blood. What's blood for, if not for shedding?
Yes, we got Candyman here. This was written by Clive Barker and Bernard Rose. Clive Barker is actually the author of the short story that this movie is based off of, called The Forbidden. We got the director as Bernard Rose as well. We have a runtime of about an hour and 39 minutes. It was produced by Propaganda Films, Polygram Film and Entertainment, and distributed by TriStar Pictures. As stated before, this came out in 1992, but on September 11th, it was only released at Toronto International Film Festival. And then in October, that's when it was released worldwide in theaters. We got a budget here of $8 to $9 million. There wasn't an exact number that I could find, but that's the general budget frame there. And then the box office came in at $25.7 million. So it did do pretty well in theaters. And then we have our cast here. Helen Lyle is played by Virginia Madsen. We got our Candyman played by Tony Todd. Trevor Lyle is played by Xander Berkeley. Bernadette Bernie Walsh is played by Cassie Lemons. And Anne-Marie McCoy is played by Vanessa Williams.
Awesome. And then regarding a few of the cast members, I did have, I guess, some cool facts or some other films that they were in. Going back to Miss Madsen, who plays Helen, she, like a lot of people in this film, have continued to act, which is different than the first movie we did, Night of the Living Dead, where a lot of those people, they stopped acting or weren't in a lot of roles. Majority of the people in this film have continued over time. Helen, oddly enough, was in a 2015 film called Dead Rising Watchtower, which is actually based off of the Dead Rising video game, which is crazy because I never thought in a million years that would become a video game.
Yeah, me neither. I didn't even know that. Let alone she acted in it as well.
Yes, and I believe it was a straight to video, straight to home streaming devices and everything kind of film. So that would be one I'd be interested to watch. I doubt that it's honestly good, but it'd be pretty fun. She was also in that film Joy, which seems to be the kind of biggest film besides this one that she's done. I know that movie featured Jennifer Lawrence as well as Bradley Cooper.
Yeah, I believe I have here that she was also in Haunting in Connecticut. I don't know what role she played in that movie, but I did see that on her IMDb page.
Oh, wow. Nice. Okay, cool. And then going to our man, Tony Todd. He is actually in my all-time favorite war film, Platoon. He ended up playing Sergeant Warren, and then he had a recurring role in the Final Destination series, I believe at least the first 4. I can't say anything past that, as William Bloodworth.
Yeah, and believe it or not, going back to last week, he was actually Ben in the 90s version of Night of the Living Dead.
Really?
Yeah, it ties in so perfectly together. But it blew my mind when I read that. I haven't seen the 90s version of Night of the Living Dead.
I haven't either. That's crazy. I guess it makes sense. Do you know what year that was released? Was that after Candyman or was that before?
I honestly I don't have that exact year. I just have it came out in the 90s.
Gotcha. Okay. I want to say my favorite other movie that some of our actors and actresses were in is actually coming from Vanessa Williams, who plays Anne-Marie in this film. She was actually a pharmacist in one of the greatest movies of all time, Like Mike.
Like Mike, really?
Yeah, Like Mike. You know, you're not representing with my boy Calvin Cambridge. He's gonna dunk on you, man. Come on.
This guy has been hyping this news up since before we recorded this podcast, and I gotta say I'm a little disappointed in that news there.
You're disappointed. I know that the people will respect it. You know what I would do for a Best Buy exclusive 4K steelbook of Like Mike? Just here.
No, man, that's got to go straight to Criterion.
Oh my goodness. But I have to go back and watch that now because I don't, I want to see how she looks. I know that came out, was that about 9 years after this film? So I want to see how she was in that film and how long her screen time was, because I don't even remember the pharmacist in the movie, to be honest. I haven't watched that movie in probably over 10 years.
Yeah, thanks to this podcast, I'm actually be looking out for like multiple actors in a lot of different movies. I'll be like, oh, we reviewed that movie and they were in this one.
Yes. Cool. And before we jump right into the film, did you have anything else you wanted to share about any other actors? Anything that you thought was pretty cool?
Nothing about the actor specifically. It's more like fun facts here and facts about the movie.
Gotcha. Okay. And I know a little different than we did the first week. We are going to save the fun facts for the end after we discuss the movie. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Candyman. Very beginning. There's so many bees, man. I don't mess with bees. I don't like bees. I don't like insects. I don't like flies. I don't like ants. I knew what this movie was about to be when we seen all them bees.
Yeah, and funny enough, those bees were actually real.
Wait,
Every single bee in this movie is 100% real. They were trained specifically for this movie, and they used baby bees because their stingers are less harmful than adult bees.
oh yeah, see, no, I'm good. If I got picked to act in this movie, no, thank you. I'll go be on the. I guess back then I'll be on the straight to VHS movie. I'm not messing with no real bees.
Hey man, you gotta do what you gotta do for the horror genre.
Yeah, right. No, thank you. But Deonte ain't doing that. Pretty much at the very beginning of the movie, after they show all those bees, I think you had mentioned to me a little bit earlier, they use kind of a sky cam view for that.
Yeah, so at the beginning of this movie, I believe it's like right at the beginning where the credits are rolling in. They use a sky cam, and this was the first movie to ever use that sky cam. It hasn't been done before, and that's that aerial view, and it went over Chicago. It shoots up to 500 millimeter lens with no vibration, and just knowing that this was the first movie to ever use that, you see that so much and nowadays, and you got drones flying overhead like it's nothing. It's pretty surreal that this is that first movie.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I know once we got to 2001, when Vince McMahon started the XFL, they used actually a sky cam, and later on the NFL adopted that. So I wouldn't be surprised if, since this film was the first one to kind of adopt that, if they got that from them, which is crazy.
Yeah, I'm sure it probably did. Of course, technology has really advanced since then, but I'm sure it's all originates to this original Skycam.
Right. And then so from that original view where you get the Skycam of all the bees, what do we get next, Jose?
This is where we get a story of Candyman, like the first story, and it goes into a babysitter babysitting this baby, and she invites this boy, Billy, and her name is Clara, and of course they're gonna do the adult stuff, get busy with it, and they go up to the restroom, and Clara dares Billy to start saying the Candyman name, those 5 times.
Yes, and she essentially Billy chickens out. He does not say it 5 times, and she tells him to go downstairs. She's gonna have like a surprise for him or whatever, and he goes downstairs. When she's still in the bathroom, and she says it the 5th time, of course, cuts the lights, turns it back on, and Candyman is behind her and kills her, and that's the very first death scene of the film right off the bat.
Yeah, and it goes into the student now, and you start getting these like almost mythical rumors about Billy's hair going white because of what he saw happen to Clara, and how he just went insane because of it. And there's that she says that Clara says Candyman for the 5th time, but nobody really knows if she did, because who else would be in that restroom with her? So you start getting like these rumors almost making you believe that these stories aren't real, even though we're watching a Candyman movie.
Alrighty, so yes, and then after that, Helen, who is the one gathering this information from these freshmen, she ends up going into a large auditorium, and there's a man that's teaching this class, and he's talking about this folklore, this kind of legend of the Candyman as well. And we end up finding out that that is Helen's husband.
Yeah, we get the introduction of Helen's husband, Trevor. And you can see him, she starts walking down the stairs, you can see him like flirting with this student. And you can tell that there's some kind of energy going on there. And she knows it too, you could see it in her face as she stops and just kind of looks at them. And then she butts in like, oh, I'm the wife. Who are these people? Yeah, so that energy, you can definitely tell.
Yeah, it was a little bit of an odd scene. The other kids were just, class, regular, I guess, like class students, and Trevor introduces each of them by name. He ends up introducing that student that's being a little extra flirty, says that, oh, this is Stacy. And Stacy is giving Helen a bit of a glance. And when she's kind of shooed off, she doesn't just leave right away. She's very hesitant to leave. And that's where you as a viewer, you learn that something is definitely going on. And this is where you realize Stacy is a buster and Trevor is a certified buster as well. We don't condone that around these parts.
No, not at all. That's, yeah.
Yeah, so then Helen does end up asking Trevor, like, what, basically, what's up with her? And Trevor says, oh, it's nothing, and she says, well, she wouldn't even look me in the eye. And even though we know that she was definitely giving Helen kind of a little bit of a stare down.
Yeah, it was pretty obvious, like, that, I forgot what was her name, the student.
Stacy
it is. And yeah, she's just looking Helen straight in the face the whole time. Like, when even during the handshake, she looks her dead in the eyes, like, oh, you know what's going on here.
Yep. And it's surprising that she's that bold to be able to basically act like that right in front of the wife. Like, that's crazy.
Some people are like that. It is crazy.
Yep. And so from then, Helen ends up leaving the auditorium and she goes back into which we can assume is either her classroom or some type of research classroom. And she's on a computer. She's typing stuff. She's writing down things. And a custodian comes in and overhears her, about the Candyman. And the custodian, her name is Henrietta. And she says, I know about the Candyman. And she proceeds to tell Helen that she has she says a friend knows that the Candyman killed someone. And she says, I'm going to go get that friend. So she walks outside. The friend is actually right down the hall, as it's another custodian named Kitty. And that's when we are introduced to her, and she comes in to proceed to tell the story.
Yeah, she tells the story of this Ruthie Jean that was in her home, and she started hearing someone coming through her wall. That's what Kitty says, someone coming through the wall. And she was calling the police, and the police were kind of brushing her off, like, oh, this isn't really that serious. We'll take our time with it. And eventually she was found dead, and someone had come through that wall. And Kitty doesn't feel comfortable telling this story at all. And Henrietta actually butts in and starts telling it with more enthusiasm. And eventually Kitty kind of gives her this ugly look, like, you're saying too much. We shouldn't be telling her all this information. And it kind of makes you feel like something more is going on with that story. What do they know that they aren't telling?
Yes. And then a weird, interesting kind of note. And it goes back to, if you remember last week when we talked about Night of the Living Dead, there was 2 instances where when they were watching the television, they said it was on the TV, so it must be true. We also get that in this film, but regarding the newspaper. Now, when Trevor was giving his speech to the class, or his lecture, I should say, there's a point where he says, well, it was in the newspaper, it must be true, related to the Candyman story. Now, Henrietta says again, it was in the paper, it must be true, when she's talking to Helen. So it's just kind of interesting how, I guess, the paper held so much weight during this time that if it was in the paper, it was believed to be true. That's what people went to for their news and what was going on in their city.
Yeah, I didn't even notice that at all. That's something to look out for in future movies, I guess, for me. Now that you mentioned that, is how much of an influence this media has on our character.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so at that point, when Kitty was looking all suspicious and felt like she had said too much, she gets up and she leaves. And then at that point, we end up going back to Helen's apartment, and this is where we meet, or she's there with Bernadette, who she had there was like a little brief scene, but it wasn't really too important, where she goes into a classroom and Bernadette's talking with another student, and they just kind of chit chat for a little bit. They end up coming back to, they end up going back to the apartment, and Helen is showing her this like access point where they can see through the other apartment wall, I guess you could say. So they go to the bathroom, and there's like a mirror on the other side, and she says, oh, okay, if you remove this medicine cabinet and then you push this through, you could see right through. And Bernadette is saying like, oh, don't do that, someone could be there. And Helen says, well, it's abandoned. And they go off this kind of Candyman thing where they say, oh, we'll say it 5 times. So they say it 4 times, and then they chicken out saying it the 5th time. So it's kind of like these characters have heard these stories so far, and if they didn't believe it, they would have said it the 5th time. But there has to be some little bit of truth there behind it that they were afraid to say it that 5th time.
Yeah, and all this was happening because Helen was telling Bernadette that her building was actually modeled after the same building in what is that place? Cabrini Green. So, and that was cut off because of the wealth barrier, and Chicago needed to have that dividing line. So they turned her place into these nice apartments and left that other one. But it was the same one. So that same story that we heard earlier, Kitty telling of that girl dying, Helen starting to believe that someone just actually pushed through that medicine cabinet and killed that Ruthie Jean. And yeah, Helen ends up saying Candyman 5 times, and Bernie was too scared to say it for that 5th time. And then that kind of leads us into the next scene where she's alone sleeping, and you can tell she's having these bad dreams. But then we get this jump scare of Trevor like crawling towards the bed and jumping up out of nowhere onto Helen, scaring her. I've never seen anybody do this in my life, especially coming home so late, as he says. It's a funny scene to watch.
Yeah, Trevor, I don't know what's gotten into your man. Helen's asleep on the bed and the lights are out, and he kind of hears a sound, so she's saying like, Trevor, and then out of nowhere, from the bottom angle of the shot, Trevor jumps to the bed, but it's not like he jumps like, you know, if you or me were to jump on the bed, you just jump on the bed. He perfectly jumps in this weird like creature-like stance. I don't even know what you'd call it. It was supposed to be a jump scare because it had the jump scare noise with it. It didn't get me. I just thought he looked like a crazy baboon or something, man. I don't know what was going on.
Yeah, and then he just immediately goes into this cuddle and says, oh, I'm wasted. I've never done anything like that when I'm wasted.
Right, that's got to be the new thing from now on. You got to be crawling on the floor like you're Pennywise as a spider. And then you're going to jump up. You got to pretend the camera's angled just like in the movie. You got to jump up, and then as soon as you land in the bed, you got to be straight in cuddle position.
Hey, I don't got to be wasted. I'm going to try that every day from now on.
Oh my gosh, that made me laugh. That didn't scare me. I don't know who they thought they were scaring in 1992, but that made me laugh. So then after that weird scene, it cuts to where Bernadette and Helen, they're all dressed up, and they're going to, was it Carnegie Green? Is that how it's pronounced?
Cabrini Green.
Cabrini Green. They're going over there because they want to see the place of the murder. And this is where we start getting in the film where the actual kind of divide is between how, you know, Black people are portrayed and how they're presented and things of that nature, when there's a bunch of, to be honest, hoodlums that are outside and they're harassing Bernadette and Helen.
Yeah, as soon as they get out of the car, they're like, hey, what you want over here? And, you know, catcalling them. And when they get closer to the actual building, these, I guess they're supposed to be gang members. They're kind of perceived that way as well. And they start to realize that these women are dressed up like almost like cops. And even Helen and Bernie call it out when they're driving to the place. They're like, "Oh, we look like cops. We're gonna get into trouble." So it just continues with that. And when they start walking up the stairs of the building, these gang members are yelling up the building, kind of warning everybody, like, "Hey, cops are coming up. Watch out, everybody." And it kind of gives you that, oh, even though that these gang members might be, causing trouble in this building, they're still on the lookout. Like, the cops are the real bad people.
Yes, and the thing is too that's a little interesting is like Bernadette is black, but Helen is white. And also because Bernadette was not dressed like they were, she looked upper class. And so they kind of viewed her in the same light as Helen. And so it makes it seem where anytime anyone is in their area, in their apartment complex that either looks like Bernadette or is white like Helen, it's trouble. It's never anything good.
Yeah, that's exactly what they say in the movie. And it just makes you think about all the other white people that come into there causing trouble and what they do to these black people.
Yes. And so then they end up going through the apartment complex and they find the abandoned one where the actual spot of the murder takes place or took place. And Helen has one of the disposable cameras and she's taking photos, lots of photos, and she finds kind of the equivalent to how her apartment complex was. She finds that bathroom where it has the hole to the other side.
Yeah, she pushes out the medicine cabinet in the restroom. And mind you, this is all in the dead Ruthie Jean's apartment, and it hasn't been touched since she died. So there's that ugly smell that they smell, and Bernie's telling Helen, like, she's being mindful, like, you can't go in there. Somebody died in there. What's wrong with you? Why are you going through all this stuff? Respect this person that was murdered in here. And Helen obviously doesn't care. She goes through the medicine cabinet and she starts taking pictures, and this is where you get that first mural of Candyman. Man, that thing is terrifying. Even as a kid, when I saw this as a kid, about 5-6 years oldish, and that has been burned in my brain ever since. It's a very creepy scene. You see his mouth just wide open with a hole in the middle of his mouth.
Yes, and the way that they filmed it was very good because you get, and how long the camera was on that mural of his face and mouth, you know that it's going to pop up many, many times in the film, and it actually does.
Yeah, exactly. And he does do that face later on in the film as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and then while she's there and she's taking more of these photos, it was really weird. She found those candies with the razor blades in them, and there was blood on them, and it looked like fresh blood too.
Yeah, I don't remember if they ever said whose blood it was, but that it just kind of goes back to him killing before earlier in the movie. Like, is it that person's blood? Whose blood is this?
Mm-hmm. Right. And so then Helen, she goes back through the hole, and Bernadette, like any smart person, says, "We got to get out of here. Like, you're not going back in there." And Helen says, "No, I just need to get more film. I just need to get more film." And she's like, "No, you're not going back in there." Which I don't blame her. I wouldn't have been there in the first place. But as soon as they turn around, that's when we get introduced to a very new character that is Anne Marie.
Yeah, this introduction of Anne Marie is very important in the film. She calls out to Helen, like, "What are y'all doing?" And she's even cautious about who these people are. They obviously look like cops, so she's very scared about what they're doing, if they're those white people causing trouble. But Helen starts explaining herself, why they're there, what they're doing, and Anne Marie just invites him into her apartment, and this is where we meet Anthony, her baby. So that is also very important as well.
Yes, and as Anne Marie is talking to them, we see again Helen mentions, like she mentioned to the hoodlums earlier, we're not cops, and she ultimately gets Anne Marie to trust her. And like you said, we end up meeting the dog. We meet her baby as well. And that's when Anne Marie ends up starting to tell the story of what she knows about the murder that occurred in the apartment, the Ruthie Jean murder. And she mentions how she's scared for herself, she's scared for her child, and she was the one that had called 911 and no one came.
Yeah, and she was hearing that whole murder of Ruthie Jean while being next door, and I can only imagine how traumatizing that must be to hear. And then she goes on to say that not all of us are like those people downstairs, referring to those gang members that we encountered earlier. And then she's just trying to get out of where she's living now, and that just kind of hits home to, I guess, to everybody. You know, you want better for yourself, better for Anne Marie. You feel that sympathy after all that she's gone through with her baby. She just wants better for herself and for her child.
Yep, exactly. And playing back on society roles, I mean, during that time and even a lot today, if you have someone that is living in a not so great part of town, a lot of people that don't live there are going to look at all those people and feel like they're the same and treat them that they're the same just because they're in that current living situation. So it's very, very important that she said that. And by her saying that, it kind of let Helen, or helped Helen, know that, you know, she's one of the good ones. She's not like those other people. So Helen can trust her, and, you know, she can trust Helen.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why Anne Marie becomes so important, because you fall in love with this character that just wants, you know, she's a mom. She wants better for herself and for her child. So, and it just takes you on this into the next scene. From there, you go to a dinner scene with Trevor, Bernie, and Helen. You meet these new kind of characters. They're a bunch of colleagues of Trevor's, but one that kind of stands out is this Philip Purcell. And I hate this guy. I hate this guy so much. He is such a snob, a womanizer. He mansplains everything when he's talking to Helen and Bernie, and just, it gives me the ugliest feeling.
Oh yeah, I got the same thing, and it sucks because, the camera cuts to the dinner scene where you see him, and he just automatically came off as super obnoxious, and it sucks because he's a fellow long-haired dude. Like, he has long hair, so I'm thinking this guy's gonna be cool. No, the dude was a straight up buster, man. I can't stand him.
Yeah, he really let you down with those long locks, man.
I know. He, like Jose had mentioned, he's telling Helen, what research do you have on the Candyman? Do you even know the true origins of him? And her and Bernadette say, well, no. So then he laughs at them and says, ha ha ha, why do you think you're gonna have a better presentation than mine and stuff? And it's like, come on, dude, you don't have to do that. First off, you don't talk to women like that. Second off, you're a total douchebag. But he is useful because he then explains the origins of Candyman, and we start learning more about this, mythical guy.
Yeah, so we get the backstory of how Candyman became Candyman, and he was actually the son of a slave who gained his wealth due to an invention, and because of that, he put Candyman through all this schooling, and he became a really good artist. And one of these wealthy white men actually wanted Candyman to do a portrait of his daughter, and Candyman fell in love with that woman even though she was married, and they fell in love with each other, and he impregnated her. And because of that, this father of that woman attacked Candyman. This is where we get that lynching. If you want to go into that, Deonte.
Yes. So he ends up the father of the young lady ends up hiring some goons to essentially kill the Candyman, and that's exactly what they do. They beat him up. They end up going to a beehive, and they pull out the middle part that has all the honey in it, so the bees go crazy. They smeared honey all over Candyman, and he was ultimately stung to death. And then once he was stung to death, they then threw him in a fire and burned him alive down to ashes and scattered him. So it was very, very brutal, very, very gruesome, and just inhumane. And we learn why Candyman has come back to seek revenge because of his, unfortunate death.
Yeah, and they also cut his hand off and stick that hook in place of it. That's where we get that signature Candyman hook.
Yep, they sawed off his hand, which is, I guess they did that because he was an artist. Artists use their hands, so they didn't want him to be able to have the tool that he had to be successful, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So we get that story, and so at this point, Helen and Bernadette, they're more intrigued, and Helen decides to go back to the apartments to go see Anne-Marie. Unfortunately, Anne-Marie is not there. She knocks on the door. Nobody comes. She looks through the window, and she's just greeted by a Rottweiler. But the camera pans, and we see a little boy standing there, and that's where we learn about Jake.
Yes, Jake is this really young boy. He's one of my favorite characters in the movie. He is so mature. He is very well spoken, and he knows who Candyman is, and he's prepared. Like, I was mentioning earlier that this little kid living in this area, they portrayed him so well. I guess comparing it to real life, like these little kids growing up in these gang areas, in these bad neighborhoods, have to grow up and take care of themselves so that they won't be put in these bad situations, so they won't end up getting themselves killed, and I guess that's why I really fell in love with this character, because of how he portrayed himself and how they wrote his lines, and even the actor just playing that character so well.
Yes, exactly. And he's even, not only is he smart because of him knowing of the Candyman and being prepared for Candyman, but the way that he talks to Helen, he's just like the other people in the building, the adults, where they don't trust cops. They don't trust white people. Their association is when those people come to our apartment, something bad happens. It's a negative experience. And so Helen tries to talk to Jake, and again, just like she did with Anne-Marie and the hoodlums in the beginning, she immediately tells him, I'm not a cop. I'm not a cop. I'm here to just talk to Anne-Marie. Is she home? Jake is very kind of standoffish at that time. He says she's not here. And she asks about Candyman, and Jake knows about him, but he tells her that she shouldn't be here. You show a lot of, I'm trying to think of the way to word it. How does he? Do you know the quote he says? He essentially says, you're brave for coming here alone, right? Is that what he says?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so yeah, he does that, and he ends up putting Helen is able to talk her way into getting the trust from Jake, and that's when
she's having to do that quite a bit in this movie.
Oh yeah, seems like every character she ends up meeting, she has to win them over, and she does a great job of it, because Helen is very, she's sincere, but she's also truthful, and she comes off that way, and so that's when Jake decides to show her what's going on.
Yeah, so he takes her down the building, and they go past this almost bonfire, unlit, and there's a bunch of trash and garbage and old furniture. And he mentions that, or she asks him if there's going to be a bonfire, and he's like, yeah, there's going to be one pretty soon. We're just getting prepared for it. So that kind of hints at something that goes on later in the movie. And as they're walking past that, Jake starts telling Helen this story of Candyman and how he killed this little boy in these outside restrooms. And he goes on to start telling that this little boy was with his mom in this grocery store or convenience store across the street, and he had to use the restroom really bad, and eventually the mother got annoyed and just sent him off into the restrooms alone. And he says that the mom just heard this loud screaming from the boy, and they they show this clip of her coming out of the convenience store, and she just falls like she knows what happened, that this little boy got taken by this Candyman. And this other character, we don't get a name from him, but they describe him as this like strong character, this built character, I guess because he goes into the restroom and comes back, and we get that same story from the beginning of the movie where his hair turns white, and that just kind of connects there. And man, the what happens they describe to that little boy, he actually gets his genitals cut off by Candyman, and that's really what scared this big strong character, and it's very sad to hear.
Right. And then of course Helen, being the investigative journalist, if you will, that she is, she decides to go into this bathroom to investigate herself and take some pictures. And man, that bathroom was disgusting. She walks in, and I mean, it's just filthy. There's graffiti everywhere, and she's making gagging sounds and holding her hand up to her nose because of the smell. She opens up each of the 3 stalls. First one, nothing. Second one, nothing. The third one, though, has an arrow that's pointing down at the stall, and when she goes and lifts it, it's full of bees.
Yeah, you get all these bees coming back again, and there's also poop written on the wall. What was it? Streets to the street, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess that's a gang thing, because you see that throughout the movie in the apartment complex that Helen goes through. But yeah, it was very disgusting there. I don't know why she would continue to just, and she's even like holding her nose. The smell must be horrible.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then the camera pans back outside, and we get the little boy, and we see this man, a figure, appear behind him, and he turns and says, "Candyman." And so at that point, like, oh, okay, like this is crazy, like, business is picking up. So then it goes back into the bathroom, and this man walks in, and he's got a hook. The hook's not his hand, though. He's holding a hook, and there's 3 goons with him.
Yeah, and this he doesn't look like a normal Candyman. Like Deonte said, his hand was holding a hook. It wasn't the actual story where you get the hook in place of the hand, and he just starts harassing Helen. And what is he at?
Oh, he says, "I hear you looking for Candyman."
There you go. I hear you looking for Candyman. And they just start harassing, and eventually they start beating up Helen, kind of, as this punishment, like you shouldn't be looking for Candyman. And this guy is embracing that Candyman character, even though we know this is definitely not him. And then it jumps to this police lineup where all the guys are saying that line, "I hear you looking for Candyman," and eventually Helen points him out in the line.
Yeah, and she's there with the cop, a black cop, and he tells her, "Great job for pointing him out." Helen asks how they found him. And they said, well, they went into the place, and I guess they, just found him. They asked questions, and they got to the bottom of it, to say the least. Helen's eye, though, at this point is crazy swollen. It looks as if, I thought she was going to lose her eye, which we find out shortly after she doesn't. But I mean, it's really, really messed up. I mean, those guys really roughed her up. She goes outside after pointing out the guy who assaulted her, and we have Jake, who's sitting on the bench. And you think that he would be happy that she was okay and they got this guy, but he wasn't. He immediately tells her, "I want to go home. You said this would be our secret."
Yeah, he's very upset with her, and you wouldn't expect that because, he kind of saved her from, I guess, eventual death. He called the cops and everything, but he was mad because he didn't want to be in that police setting. He didn't want Helen pointing out who this Candyman guy was. And Helen starts telling Jake that, oh, Candyman's not real. He's just this guy that pretends to be Candyman. And you can tell that Jake's not satisfied. He's like, that's not Candyman. I know who the real Candyman is. There's no way. I don't believe you.
Right. Exactly. And so then the next scene we get is Helen back home, and her eyes completely fine now, besides like some minor bruising, and she's happy as can be, because in her mind she's gotten to the bottom of this. Candyman is this, fictional character, and she's gonna write about it in her essay or her paper that she's gonna do, and then it cuts one more time to her walking outside with Bernadette, and she mentions, which is again interesting, 2 black people were murdered at that apartment complex and nobody does a thing, but a white woman gets attacked and they lock down the place.
Yeah, and that was a very big moment in that these cops only care about, these white women that are distressed and they barely get touched, while people are getting murdered and they take their sweet time to even answer just a call. It's very sad to hear that, and for Helen to realize that, you kind of start gaining her trust as a character. You start believing that she's the good one in this story.
Yeah, because she's understanding of these social differences there. I mean, even like when she asks, how'd you find him? And the cop says, well, we went there and, we asked questions. We got to the bottom of it. They do it then. But when 2 black people were murdered, they didn't do anything. So I don't know. That's really odd, but important. And it was just one of those quick lines that was thrown out. So that way the viewer knows kind of what some alternate, this movie isn't just, hey, it's a scary movie, you should get scared, but what the real meaning behind everything is.
Yeah, exactly. And if we can kind of just take a part of that, the director of this movie, he did extensive research about the real Cabrini Green in Chicago. He went there and he flew out there and he met these people in person and he took their stories, and believe it or not, he took some of those people and put them as extras in this movie.
Really?
Yeah, I believe they come in at the very end. But yeah, he took these normal people, and after doing that research, taking the time to get to know these people, instead of just, oh, I'm gonna make this story, but I'm not even gonna do my research on it, meet these people. Like a lot of movies are made. So knowing that, it made me fall in love with this movie even more.
That's cool. I didn't know that at all. That's really interesting. So then Bernadette ends up letting Helen know that there are some people that want to publish their work on Candyman. Both of them are very excited. They say that they're going to talk about it soon. And then we get Helen. She's walking back to her car. She's in like a parking garage, and we get this man walking. So Helen's walking like normal, and then the camera shows just feet, pant legs, and like a long kind of trench coat.
Yeah, we get this actual introduction to Candyman, of who he is, how he looks, what he's dressed in, and it's pretty terrifying meeting him. How they do that pan, and his voice is talking, and Helen hears it in her head before she even realizes that Candyman is actually there. And while she's walking, and we get these different shots, she's not even looking around like, is there anybody around me? It makes it even scarier, like someone's gonna attack her and she's not even looking. And then you meet this Candyman, and she starts getting freaked out, like she knows it's him, and she starts getting really scared, and eventually it just cuts, like she blacks out.
Yes, but before she blacks out, we got to talk about my dude Candyman, though. So when he was doing his voice, that was definitely creepy, because you can tell he's inside of her head. because as the voice is speaking, his mouth isn't moving. So that lets you know he can get inside her head and manipulate it. But when he was walking and all you could see was his shoes and pants, oh, my man was dressed ever so dapper. I mean, the pants he was wearing, they clean as heck. I immediately thought this. I wasn't even scared at this point in the film. I didn't care if we met Candyman or not. I wanted his pants. Could you imagine me walking around in them pants and them dress shoes? Oh man, ooh. I'd be looking fine like cherry wine, man. So that's all I was thinking about. Then, you know, we get his voice and it's like, okay, it's pretty creepy, but I still couldn't. I was still so focused on his pants.
You were way too focused on his pants, man. It stole from the scene.
I know. If
you're gonna have to go find those at an auction somewhere.
I mean, when you come in all stylized like that, I mean, what am I gonna do? You know.
Too bad he ruined them.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, he ruined them very, very quick. So I know you mentioned Helen blacks out, and this is from this point on, the movie picks up. The first half of the movie, I know we talked a lot about it because it is a lot of details and a lot of kind of small things, but it's fairly slow. From this point on, it's just nonstop. Boom, 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 boom. Hit you over the head with something. And Helen, when she wakes up from being blacked out, she is in a puddle of blood and she has this like hatchet next to her and she's in a bathroom.
Yeah, she wakes up in this bathroom not knowing where she is, and immediately she picks up this hatchet. Like, she doesn't know what's gonna happen, so she's defending herself, and she opens the door and she starts looking around, and eventually she sees Anne-Marie's dog beheaded, completely decapitated. And this is where we start to realize, oh, we're in Anne-Marie's apartment. What is she doing there? How did she get there? She's covered in blood. She's freaking out herself. And then she walks into the next room and she finds Anne-Marie.
Yes, Anne-Marie is like coddled over the baby crib, and her child is missing. Anthony is gone, and she turns around and she sees Helen and immediately leaps at her and attacks her because obviously Anne-Marie didn't have blood on her, so we can kind of assume that she had just gotten home or something along those lines, and she sees the blood everywhere from the dog being decapitated and Helen holding a hatchet. So what else are you going to do? So she attacks her. She gets the best of Helen at first, but then Helen takes the hatchet and gives her a little slice on the arm, and that causes Helen to then get on top of Anne-Marie. And as soon as she raises the hatchet as if she was going to do something else, police barge in and arrest her.
Yeah, they take Helen to the precinct, and then they start doing this strip search, and this by this policewoman, and this policewoman is being real ugly to Helen. Like, you know, you can tell these policewomen are very, they believe that Helen did this murder. They believe that she had taken Anthony somewhere, which is Anne-Marie's baby, and killed this dog, and they treat her with the such harshness, man.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, she's in that interrogation room and she's just getting, I mean, they're coming at her hard, and it's the same black cop that was on her side and helped her when she picked out that dude in the police lineup, the fake Candyman, and now he's not having it, you know, because the way he sees it is this white woman went into a black neighborhood and possibly kidnapped this baby, because at this point they still don't know where it's at, and beheaded a dog and assaulted this young black woman. So he's pissed.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where you kind of realize, like, oh, he might just be with his fellow black people, but he wasn't before. Like, why did, you know, that difference? So and it makes you question it a little bit, but that's where they really start getting on her. And eventually Trevor, or she calls for Trevor, and she makes that phone call, and Trevor's not there. He doesn't pick up, and this is at 3 a.m. She asked the policewoman what time it is, and it's 3 a.m, and Trevor's not home. and it cuts to a scene where nobody's in bed, and you can tell that nobody's home. And then she's in the jail cell, and eventually Trevor comes, but it's already next day, and she starts asking him, like, where were you? What happened? And he's like, well, I was asleep. So it even furthers that original suspicion that he's cheating on Helen.
Yep, Trevor. He's a cheating ass buster. That's exactly what he is. So
yeah, definitely.
And you would think at this point, I mean, I guess, because if I was Helen, I would have tried to distance myself from Trevor at this point, because if he's cheating on you and he's lying to you, it's very obvious that when you really need him, while you're going through this whole trial and everything, he's not going to be there for you and he's not going to be on your side. But I mean, really, Helen didn't have anyone to be on her side, so she just kind of, all she really had was Trevor.
Yeah, and I guess that's goes into like the beginning stages of finding out someone's cheating. You don't want to believe it. You want to believe that they're going to be there for you. So she still continues to trust her husband, this is the love of her life. So, and it just continues, and he ends up letting her down, but I mean, she doesn't realize that yet.
Right, exactly. And so then we get to the point where Helen's at home and she's going through her photos that she had taken from her disposable camera. And on one of the photos, she's able to spot Candyman in the background of the photo. And so she's kind of freaked out. She goes to the bathroom and she sees Candyman. And the hook hand pops out of the bathroom window, or the mirror, excuse me. And then she gets scared. She's screaming. She runs out of the apartment down the hall and she sees him in the hall. And she's like screaming again. And then she runs back into the apartment where she's grabbing the phone because she's trying to call somebody. And Candyman appears right there in the house.
Yeah, and he appears and he starts attacking Helen and telling her that she belongs to him and that she will be immortal if she gives in and lets him kill her. And she's just scared. She's paralyzed with fear. She can't believe that Candyman is really in front of her, and she's coming to terms with it, like, this is my reality. And that's when we hear Bernie and we get a shot of her knocking on the door, and she's there to console Helen. She has flowers and she really just wants to be there for her friend. And Helen starts calling out, like, come in, he's here, but it's almost very silent. And eventually Candyman lets her in, only to end up just start killing her. And we don't get to see that yet. I've also noticed that up to this point we don't see Candyman actually killing anybody, so we just hear it. We look in the kitchen hearing him kill Bernie, and it's heartbreaking to see, or not even see, but hear what's going on. Right,
because Bernie, she was a really good person. She was there for her friend, and unfortunately she got killed. One of the important things too is that before Candyman, because what ends up happening is he takes his hook and he kind of gives Helen a little nick around the neck area, and so she's bloody and she ultimately ends up passing out. But as she's on the ground and she's passing out, before Bernie comes in, Candyman tells her that because of Helen's disbelief and not believing that he is real, she ultimately changed the stream of events, and that he did have the child and that she needed to die in the child's place.
Yeah, and we get more of the understanding of why, and he's telling Helen that that because she's kind of debunking debunking that he's real, he needs those people to believe in him just to be alive, just to continue terrorizing and continue on his legacy. And because of what happened earlier where she was telling people, oh, he's just this human that pretended to be Candyman, people started distrusting that Candyman was an actual living or mythical creature. And this is where we start getting that realization, oh, this needs to happen. He needs to kill Helen in order for people to start believing him again so he can continue and become stronger.
Right. Exactly. And so once Bernadette has been killed, Trevor ends up walking in and sees Helen on the ground, bloody and holding a knife. The scene then switches to Helen being in a bed, which we find out is her own bed in that apartment. She's handcuffed. She runs out to see Bernie like completely brutalized and murdered, and she's screaming for Trevor, and Trevor's there. And at that point, they're gonna ultimately transfer her to the police department, because if you're anyone who sees that image of her holding the knife and Bernadette just on the ground brutalized, it looks like she did it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts.
Yeah, and this is the second time where she's kind of set up by Candyman to make it believable that she had killed this dog and now her best friend. And nobody believes her. Trevor is shocked. Like, how can this happen? This is twice. Now I have to believe that my wife is his murderer. And then just seeing Bernie on that floor, it cuts to a scene where after Helen had run into the room to go take a look at her, you see that she had been gutted from the pelvic area all the way to her chest. And that's that signature Candyman type of kill where he goes all the way up and with that hook. And it just looks really ugly.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And one of the kind of interesting things is, as Helen's being transported to the hospital, she's in that police car or ambulance, and she's awake, and she keeps seeing these images flash, and it's that mural shot that we got in the beginning of the film of Candyman's face with that mouth open. It's just back and forth, flashing, and it's in her mind. She can't get it out. They get her to, essentially it's like a mental hospital. They put her in the loopy room and they tie her down completely, and she's stuck there. That's where she's going to be.
Yeah, and she's like screaming out, telling Candyman not to hurt the baby, and Candyman appears over her, hovering over the air, and he tells her that her life is over and that she belongs to him. And when she screams for help, the medics come in and they don't see Candyman. They only see Helen. And, you know, they start sedating her and telling her to calm down.
Yeah, and then when Candyman has appeared, he's hovering over her. He tries to kiss her. He says, like, let me just get a kiss. And he's slowly coming down. And that's when, because of Helen screaming, the two nurses come in.
Yeah, and with that kiss, you kind of get that sense that maybe he's keeping her alive because he's fallen in love with Helen, and that she's different because he hasn't killed her yet. He's killed everybody else so quickly that has said his name 5 times. Well, what's different about Helen?
Right. Yeah, he's got because he does want her to die, but she has to die a specific way, so that way she'll be with him eternally.
Yeah, willingly.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so at this point, when they sedate her, she's out. And then we get it where the next scene, she wakes up and they put her in a wheelchair, and she's asking to see Trevor. And the nurse, who's like this dude, ends up saying, "Oh, I'd like to see him too." He's very, very sarcastic. And that's where we get introduced to Dr. Burke.
Yeah, so Dr. Burke is this guy, and immediately he starts saying that he's working for her defense. So he's trying to get her cleared, I guess not to be insane, or possibly insane, to get her out and be stuck at the hospital instead of going to jail. And he also tells her that she's been in that hospital under a month, under the sedations, and she starts freaking out, like she doesn't know how that is possible, and she wants to get out of there so badly. And then it cuts to Dr. Burke showing her these screens, and on these screens it's Helen, from in kind of in that same position where she's strapped down, yelling at Candyman, hovering over her. But we see on these screens that there was nobody there, that she looks loopy, she looks insane, crying out again for this Candyman, or against this Candyman, and he's not even there.
Yeah, and Helen, she can't believe it. She's in utter disbelief. And then she ends up summoning Candyman, and he appears behind Dr. Burke, and he kills Dr. Burke and says, "You're mine now," talking to Helen. But with the death of Dr. Burke, this is the first one that we actually see on screen.
Yeah, and it's definitely a brutal one. You see him do that pelvic to chest classic kill, and he comes from behind and he just starts working his way up, and you see his head come up from under the desk, and oh, there's blood everywhere. It gets on Helen and it gets on Candyman, and you see Dr. Burke originally just sitting there, and you just start seeing blood spewing out of his mouth.
Oh yeah, it was super brutal, but it's very cool to see. They did a good job with that first kill that you do see on screen. And so he then ends up telling Helen that, if you want the baby alive, you need to come see me. And he does something which in a way was to help Helen get out of the hospital. He jumps out of the window backwards, which when you hear glass break, it's very loud. You hear nurses in the background saying, like, Dr. Burke, Dr. Burke, and they're trying to get into the room. But I actually forgot to mention, before Candyman leaves, he takes his hook and slices the straps on Helen so that way she could actually get up from the wheelchair. But he also ended up putting a knife in Helen's hand. So it makes it seem like if she just sat there, it would look like she killed Dr. Burke again. So Helen has to act fast, and that's when she makes her escape.
Yeah, she goes out the window that Candyman flew through, and that him just flying backwards kind of looked funny to me. He just like shrivels up, and then you just see him like taken from out the window. But Helen gets out and starts crawling on the ledge to this next open window. And right here, she tackles this nurse, knocks her unconscious, and steals her uniform. And she uses that to escape. And the first place she goes to is her apartment.
Which is the complete, Helen, why would you go there? Just go see Candyman. But for some reason, she still has this faith in Trevor. So she goes to the apartment. She walks in, and everything is different. There's like bags over everything. There's the setup because there's painting that's being done. And who do we see painting, Jose? Go ahead and tell us.
We see the student Stacy. Trevor is such a scumbag, man. He is, oh my goodness. Helen's been gone a month, and we see Stacy painting as if this is her new apartment. She's all moved in. Trevor comes out in his robe like nothing is wrong, like he has no worries in the world. And they finally see Helen, and they immediately get so scared, like she's a monster.
Yeah, and before we continue, Mr. Trevor, I got a bone to pick with you, sir. I've been waiting all podcasts to get on you, sir. You're not getting away from this. First off, you're a certified, bona fide, real deal Holyfield buster. You cheating ass dude. Helen was a good wife. She was there for you. But what'd you do? You cheated on her. You've been cheating on her. Let alone you cheat on her with a college student. Your student, in fact. Someone who's probably half your age. Someone whose brain ain't even developed yet. You manipulative, using big words here, manipulative bum. I hate you, Trevor, and I'm glad that you got what you got at the end of the film. Stacy, what's the matter with you? I'm done with you. You're irrelevant. Let's continue on. before I rant more.
Hey, she's not irrelevant. She's just as bad as Trevor, man. She deserves what she. Well, I mean, she didn't really get much, but she deserves just as much, man. She looked this woman who was married to the guy she's sleeping with dead in the eyes and shook her hand. Like, how bold do you have to be to do that?
Man, I hate both of these characters so much. They did such a great job of making you hate both of these individuals, and their hatred with Stacy, it's right away, and with Trevor, it does become, you start to hate him, but it gradually increases as the film goes on. So that way, when this scene hits and he walks out in that robe, oh man, I mean, you're fuming mad at this point.
Yeah, definitely. But it like I said earlier, it cuts to them going to that scared state because they do realize Helen is there, and they both believe that Helen is this murderer, and it doesn't make you sympathize with them at all. Like, I still hate these people, and I do wish that Helen might actually do something to them. And she's kind of starts toying with them. She sees that they're scared, and she's like, well, you want to call somebody? You're looking at the phone, go ahead and call somebody then. And they're all hesitant and stuck in their tracks, and it's yeah, they deserve to feel that way. They deserve to much more.
Exactly. And then Trevor, he thinks he's all big and bad. He's going to go out here and run around with some 19, 20-year-old girl when he's probably 40 years old. When he didn't even go grab the phone when Helen told him to. And then Helen she's like frantic. She's overwhelmed. So she puts her head in her hands. And because her head is down, then you see Trevor, he starts inching over like an inchworm over to the phone, like he's going to call somebody. And as soon as Helen lifts her head up, then he's going to stop dead in his tracks like, oh, I wasn't going to grab the phone. Man, you freaking bum. So then Helen leaves at that point.
Yeah, before she leaves, one thing that she does tell Trevor is that he was all that she had left in the world. So that goes back to what you were saying earlier, that maybe that's why she was still with him, that's all she had.
See, I missed that. I was so angry with him, I didn't even catch that.
Yeah, so it just makes you like Helen even more because she really trusted this guy.
Oh yeah, 100%. And as soon as Helen leaves, what do both of them do? They ran to the phone. They didn't walk. They didn't crawl. They ran to the phone and were like dialing like crazy, calling that mental hospital. Yeah,
and it just makes you hate them. They're such cowards, and they wait until she's gone. Like, why didn't you do something before?
Exactly. So then she ends up going, she's on that bridge, right?
Yeah, she is. And she goes up and she goes to Cabrini Green looking for Candyman like he had wanted her to earlier before she went to the apartment. And she goes up and she goes through that medicine cabinet, and then she starts seeing all these murals of Candyman's story of how he was lynched and killed before he became Candyman. And then she looks over and sees Candyman asleep on this kind of bed type thing, and it's just really stone. And she tries to kill him with the hook that she has. And he awakens and tells her he's trying to convince her to surrender to him.
Right, exactly. And Helen's not wanting to surrender at all. She's wanting to fight back, but she just really can't. Candyman's pretty much got a hold of her, and he's essentially can do whatever he wants. And so he summons the bees again, so we get those returned, and they're all over Helen. They're in her mouth and everything. And then Candyman goes in and finally gets his kiss that he wanted earlier. And when he kisses her, he moves away from her mouth, and all the bees were in his mouth as well. It was disgusting.
Yeah, and then I know you didn't know before this podcast, but knowing now that those bees were 100% real, even me, like learning that after watching this movie for years and years, it made that seen that much more terrifying. And funny enough, they did get stung. Tony Todd he's actually been in 3 different Candymans, 1, 2, and 3. And over that course, he got stung 23 times. And he worked up a pretty sweet deal. For every time he got stung, he got $1,000 bonus. So I guess you can say it's worth it. I know Deonte doesn't feel that way.
Oh, of course not. As soon as you said that I was going to have to be near some real bees, I would have been out the door. In a heartbeat. No, we're not messing with real bees. And the fact that they put them in their mouth and everything, I don't care if they're baby bees at all. I mean, that's crazy to me. I can't believe I know he had in his contract for him to get more money, but I mean, $1,000 per sting, that's not even worth it, man.
No, I think that's where I would draw the line as well, is that I'd probably do on my face, but opening my mouth and having him go in there it's not worth it.
Like, what if you had to breathe in and you accidentally swallowed one?
Oh, that's another thing I have here, is that he actually wore this, like, I guess funnel type thing or something that he put at the back of his throat to avoid swallowing those bees.
Oh my gosh. Oh no, that's no bueno. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, there's no way. And then it goes from there after they start kissing, and he starts trying to convince Helen even more to let him kill her. And he tells her that the pain of the death is going to be, and in quotes there, it's exquisite, and she doesn't need to fear it because she's going to become immortal. And even though it might be that exquisite pain, she's going to be just like him. And this is where you really see that romance of Candyman trying to be with this Helen. And it makes you wonder, like, why Helen? Why is it her? And he's really trying to convince her, and these bees come out of his mouth and his body, and they just start stinging Helen.
Yeah, and she ultimately ends up passing out. And when she does awaken, the baby's gone because Candyman had taken the baby. And when there's this huge mural on the wall that has Candyman's old lover on there, and it has a resemblance of Helen. And that's where we finally understand and realize why Candyman has been so fixated on Helen this entire time, because in his mind, that's his new lover. It's like his old lover, and he has to do whatever he can to try and make sure that Helen dies in the way that she'll become immortal and spend eternity with him.
Yeah, it comes and wraps up that sense of why Helen, and we finally get that conclusion to why, and it's because he loves her. She reminds him of that original mother of his child. He wanted that family, he wanted that love, he's just a human being, and it starts making you compassionate with him. He deserves love too, even though he's this bad guy killing everybody. He deserves that family. He never deserved to be killed in the first place.
Right. And when Helen sees that mural of his old lover, her name was Caroline, there's also written on the wall, it says, "It was always Helen." And Helen grabs his hook, because his hook is there. She grabs it, which again, I don't know why she grabbed the butcher mallet or whatever earlier, and now she's grabbing the hook, which is ultimately going to play in her downfall at the end. And she hears the baby cry, and she looks out of one of the windows, and she sees that the baby is in that huge pile that her and Jake had walked by earlier that was going to be for that bonfire.
Yeah, and she looks out, and going back to that hook and that picking up all these weapons, like, it made me realize just now that she never even tried to kill Candyman. She always was too scared, like how Trevor and Stacy were when they saw her. So there was really no point in having all these weapons when she's not going to do anything with it. But she looks out and she hears Anthony, the baby, crying in this bonfire, set up, and she starts making her way down there, and she eventually gets to it and starts crawling in looking for the baby. And this is where it cuts to Jake, and he's looking out the window waiting for this Candyman, and he sees the hook going in there. He doesn't see that it's Helen, he sees the hook. And how Deonte mentioned earlier, this is the start of her downfall, because Jake starts alerting everybody, and they all start rushing down towards that bonfire with torches, and they start lighting this bonfire.
Yep. And as soon as it gets lit, that's when Candyman appears in the bonfire, and he grabs Helen, and Helen's saying, let me go. And he says that she can't leave. He even says, word for word, we will never be separated again, and you are already dead. And she ends up grabbing a stake, and she jams it into him, and the stake had some fire on it, and so of course Candyman was burned alive, so it actually affected him. He was actually hurt from it, and she begins to escape. But as she's escaping, some of the burning pieces fall on her, and so at that point her back gets burned up, and she's actually on fire with the baby, and she's still able to escape. And as she's crawling out, the people at the apartment complex notice that, hey, this is some woman that's crawling out of here, and she has this baby. So they run up to her and they pat her down, and she hands the baby off to Anne-Marie, who was in the very front of everybody. And Anne-Marie is like ready to break down in tears, and we see Helen with a scalped head and just her skin all burnt up. It was really, really sad scene.
Yeah, it definitely was. And just knowing that Helen really wanted to save this baby, and she went through this fire and being burned alive, it's heartbreaking. It's definitely heartbreaking to see, because it just makes you like Helen even more. And then she ends up being burned and dying, and it's definitely heartbreaking. And then going back to this bonfire type thing, it's making me realize, how did these people know? I guess they took it from the Candyman story, or his origins of becoming Candyman, being burned after being, have his hand cut off and these bees attacked him. They set up this bonfire. It makes you realize that they set this up specifically for him, because Jake was on the lookout, waiting for that hook, waiting for a sign of Candyman before he alerted this whole apartment complex of the appearance of Candyman.
Right. And one of the things I just kind of thought of is, we see where this is an apartment complex that has poverty, that has gangbangers and all this kind of stuff. But when it came to killing the Candyman, the entire apartment complex united, and whatever possible issues they may have had with each other, or robbings or anything, they came together to kill the real Candyman. And that kind of goes into play even in modern times, where there's a lot of areas in the United States, a lot of poverty-ridden areas where there's a lot of black-on-black violence, a lot of gang violence. But when we've had police brutality and different things of that nature, the black people come together and put that aside to fight the good fight, essentially. So, that was something really powerful to see.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't realize it at first, but it's definitely a powerful scene. And that kind of goes into the next scene that comes up when you just kind of see Trevor and Stacy at Helen's funeral, but it kind of pans out, and you see everybody that lived in that apartment complex come and pay their respects to Helen, because she helped kill Candyman. She helped, even though she was this white woman, they were so cautious of her at first. She was on their side. She wasn't fighting their good fight. And it's very touching, thinking about that. And then referencing what you had mentioned just now, that scene definitely touches me a lot more. And knowing that these people can come together and fight for a good cause and against what's going on, the bad that's going on in this world.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, 100%. And when they do come to her funeral, it is Anne Marie, her baby, and Jake who were leading the charge. And Jake, to kind of wrap up this story, drops Candyman's hook that he had retrieved from the bonfire into her, hole right above the casket, so she would be buried with it.
Yeah, and that's kind of the significance of the end of Candyman. They're burying this character that has been tormenting this apartment complex for so long, and it's kind of that sense of relief. Like, even though we had someone who was fighting with us die, that we can finally let this go and move on with our lives and try to build a better life for everybody there. So it's like I said, it's a very touching scene, especially more now, but it signifies that end of Candyman.
Yep. And you would think that this would be the end of the film at this point, but we do have one additional scene where it cuts to Trevor, and he is in the bathroom, and he looks just like he hasn't slept in who knows how many days. There's like tears welling up in his eyes, and he starts thinking of memories, all the good memories he had with Helen. And Stacy is pissed. She's asking him what he wants for dinner. He says, I'll get something in a minute. I'll be there in a minute. And she's mad. She opens up the fridge all crazy and to pull out the meat that they're going to eat for dinner. And we see those flashbacks, and Trevor just breaks down and cries.
Yeah, and right here, I don't feel bad for him at all. Like, he deserved that. Like, he didn't deserve Helen in the first place. So just realizing that he had this love of his life and he chose the wrong direction to take his life. It's heartbreaking because you see it cuts to different parts in the movie where Helen was showing that love to Trevor, and that's really what breaks your heart more, is knowing that this woman loved him so much, and now he's going through these flashbacks and Stacy's being the worst person ever, and it just makes you wish bad upon her even more, because she's getting, like Deonte said, she's getting annoyed. She's cutting meats, like she's angry so forcefully, and it's annoying on her part, and I got annoyed with her as well. And then Trevor, he starts calling out Helen's name because he misses her so much, and eventually he says it 5 times, kind of like the Candyman, and he turns off the light and he turns it back on, and there she is.
Yes, and she appears just the way that she had passed away. She is all burnt up, she has no hair, and she has the hook that she was buried with, and she ends up killing Trevor the same way that Candyman would kill his victims. And Trevor ends up screaming. Stacy at this point is now concerned, runs over to the bathroom with that same knife that she was cutting the meat with, opens the door to find Trevor sitting on the edge of the bathtub, and completely just blood everywhere, and the same cut where the pelvic area is up. And this is the end of the film, and the credits actually begin to roll with that scene.
Yeah, it cuts after Stacy like screams for the longest time, and it was definitely a brutal scene. Like Deonte said, there's blood everywhere. That tub scene just kind of replays in my head because it was set up so perfectly. Like, he was just there and his guts were everywhere. So as a horror fan, it was nice to see that as a good ending. Someone we hated so much throughout the movie finally get his due diligence.
Yes, and one of the things that I don't know if this is true or not, I'd like to maybe read some more interviews to see if it is. In a way, we remember that the entire film, Helen was framed for these murders that were committed by Candyman. He would always put a mallet in her hand, or a knife, or anything like that. Now, when Trevor's dead, Stacy takes the knife from the kitchen that she was cutting the meat with and walks into the bathroom, which would mean that obviously when the cops come, they're going to see Trevor, a bloody pulp. Where's the only weapon in the apartment? The knife that Stacy was holding. whether it's she holds it when the cops come or by fingerprint investigation, whatever it is, more than likely she will get framed for the murder, which means that she's got hers in a way as well.
Yeah, and that's very a good point there, because we want bad for her as well, knowing that she was so willing to cheat with this guy, and knowing that she's gonna go through exactly what Helen had been through the whole movie. It gives you that sense of peace, and it was a great ending in my opinion.
Yes, I love the ending a lot. The very last scene, which is still during the credits, is it actually cuts back to Candyman's abandoned apartment or lair, if you will. And now it is no longer Candyman's, because again, he was burnt alive in that fire. It's now Helen. The mural that had Candyman's face with the mouth is now a mural of Helen and her burnt head. And it's kind of looks as if it's her when she was on the ground after she had handed the baby over. And that's kind of the way of these people in this apartment complex for all that time were telling the stories and folklore of Candyman, and that's how his legend was passing around. Well, now that Candyman's dead, they have this legend of this lady Helen and what she did, and so it's kind of like she'll live forever at that apartment complex.
Yeah, and that would have been a great. I haven't seen Candyman 2, but seen on the actress's IMDb page, I don't believe she was in the second one. That would have been a great second movie to go off of, instead of continuing with the Candyman legend, is going off with her as the villain. I would have definitely liked to see that movie, knowing how good of an actress Helen was.
Same here. It was really well done. I don't know why they didn't continue on. I mean, maybe at some point we'll end up watching Candyman 2 and even 3, and of course the new one that's coming out this year, hopefully. But yeah, you're right. She didn't perform in that one, unfortunately. But that did signal the end of this film. And so with that, we want to thank you all for listening this far. But Jose, I have an important question for you, my good sir. How many pints of blood are you giving this film?
I'm going to give this film an 8.5 out of 10 pints of blood. I know that's a bit higher, especially considering what I gave last week's, and I stand strong by it.
Okay, so why is it that you give it 8.5? Is there a specific reason?
I really enjoy this movie. From the villain, especially Candyman himself, is very terrifying to me. And I guess that a lot of that comes from that nostalgia of seeing it at such an early age. That there's still sometimes where I just like randomly remember that mural that we were talking about, and Candyman will always be an influential horror character for as long as I'll live. I'm glad they're remaking the second one, but this movie as a whole, I was a lot more horror or terrified compared to any movie we've seen before, and I really love the gore. I even though we don't get much of it, I love that they showed the bodies dead. I love that they showed Candyman gutting this doctor, and it was just a good movie. What could have put it at a 10, I believe that it needed that much more killing. It needed more gore that we needed to see. We only saw Candyman do one kill, and it just needed that much more.
Okay, that's completely understandable. I would say I have to agree with you with 8.5 pints of blood.
Why do you feel that way? That's the same as last week.
Yeah, and Candyman and Night of the Living Dead are two completely different films. But I feel like with Candyman, one of the things that I really enjoyed is that I enjoy slashers a little bit more than other horror films, for one. But even though he didn't kill as many people, every single death actually mattered. A lot of times in some of these other slasher films that we watch, yeah, they may kill 20 people during the movie, and some of those death scenes are great, but a lot of it is filler, and they didn't really need to kill some of these people. We could have got more into the actual story, and I feel Candyman always focuses on the story, and that was really what was most important, and getting you from point A to point B. And the other part of it is his type of legend is something that even at an older age can be a little creepy. Like, I compare it to the Bloody Mary, saying it in the mirror in the bathroom with the lights off. And it's like, at 6 years old, I wouldn't have said Candyman 5 times in the mirror.
I definitely did. I don't know about you, but I definitely did that.
Oh, see, black people don't do that. We don't put ourselves in harm's way, sir. We like we like it safe and sound. So like,
yeah, it was me and my sister doing that. It's 6 years old. It was a fun time. We would lock each other in the restroom doing that stuff.
Oh man, see, yeah, y'all are crazy. I definitely was not doing that. To this day, as a near 24-year-old man, I still would not say Candyman 5 times in the mirror. And I know it's not real, but it's just that
We'll do it after this episode. Don't worry.
I gotta edit the episode. I don't know what you're talking about. You can go do it, and I'll be hiring a new host next week.
Oh, we'll see. We'll see.
But with that, I think we're gonna go ahead and wrap things up. I do want to mention very quickly here, because we forgot to do it in the beginning. If you want to watch this film, you can do so right now on Netflix. It is streaming for free, so you can go back and watch the film and see if you agree with what we said. And to touch on it very quickly here as well, DVD on Amazon, $4 shipped. The US Blu-ray edition, $16.97, put out through Scream Factory, 2018. It's a 2K restoration from a 4K scan. I'm sure it looks beautiful. And the last one is a UK import from our friends at Arrow Video. That is going for £18, converts over to $22.56. That one is the same exact scan as the US Scream Factory release. However, this one does come with some extra interviews, audio commentaries, as well as a 5.1 HD mastered audio. If you buy that Blu-ray, you're going to need yourself a region-free Blu-ray player. Sony 4K players, region-free. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, and can't stress enough how important to us that you support this physical media. And that just kind of goes back into that horror pack that I mentioned earlier. It's a great way to get physical copies of movies, and especially ones that you haven't seen before. So definitely go check that out as well.
Yes, and that was code ITFOLLOWS. You can save yourself $3 on your horror pack subscription. They offer DVD packs and Blu-ray packs. They have both of what you would want. Let's go ahead and get on out of here, Jose. Where can the people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. It's that guy Jose, and then on Instagram it's j.a.gallegos. I'm welcome to any feedback, anything like that. Just hit me up on the social.
Awesome. You can find myself on Twitter at _under_the_knife, on Instagram at xdeontems. That is XDEONTE. And you can follow the podcast pages on Instagram at Gruesome Task Podcast, and on Twitter at the Gruesome Task. You can watch or listen to this podcast through Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, or on Apple Podcasts. So whatever is more convenient for you, we got it. Is there any other final words that you have, sir?
Yeah, I definitely have some fun facts here for these people. So I guess the first one I'll start off with. Eddie Murphy was actually considered to play the role of Candyman. I'm unsure. I couldn't find the reason why, but a lot of rumors were either it was due to height or salary demands. Nobody really had a definite answer. But Eddie Murphy, I don't think that would have been the same.
Oh, no, it definitely would not have. I mean, at this point, Eddie Murphy is really known as a comedian. I mean, he had done Coming to America. He had done, I think it was called Raw with Eddie Murphy. And so, no, it definitely would not have been the same. People probably wouldn't have been able to take him serious.
No, and we probably wouldn't have had Candyman hold up as well as it does. Another kind of like actor changed is the producer actually had Sandra Bullock as a backup for the role of Helen in case Madsen didn't work out. And there was a lot of rumors that Madsen wasn't going to work out because she was allergic to the bees. So she was on the fence of whether she wanted to continue with this role. So could you imagine Sandra Bullock and Eddie Murphy playing these two roles instead of Virginia Madsen and Tony Todd?
It would not have worked. Because, I mean, think about this. It's like, what horror films do you know off the top of your head that are considered cult classics or all-time horror films that had well-known cast members going into the film? Maybe Sandra Bullock wasn't well-known, but like Eddie Murphy was already known.
Yeah, Eddie Murphy was definitely known. Sandra Bullock, this was actually before like her breakout in Speed. So I think that might have been interesting. Maybe her career would have gone in a much different direction than if she started in this one instead of starting off with Speed.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been able to imagine it. I mean, a lot of the horror films that we know and love, most of the actors before going into the film weren't really well known or had smaller roles, and that horror film is really what elevated them. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we don't have this kind of preconceived notion of how that actor does in films. Like, you see Eddie Murphy go into a film, you're expecting comedy. You're not expecting horror. So I like the fact that they went with Todd instead, and the Virginia Madsen who played Helen.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the Todd comment there. I wouldn't have taken Eddie Murphy seriously, and I don't think his voice would have been as influential as Candyman's. Like, Candyman has a deep voice, and he just sounds scary and terrifying. Even not even looking at the screen, just listening to his voice. And then you think about listening to Eddie Murphy's voice that same way, and no, that wouldn't have set right with anybody. But Sandra Bullock might have been interesting. I would have definitely watched that. Maybe it would have been better. Maybe it would have been worse, but it would have been interesting.
100%.
Yeah, and some other little fun facts here. The producers were actually worried about this film being portrayed as racist. So the director, Bernard Rose, he actually took it to the NAACP, and their counter argument was basically, why shouldn't a black actor be this ghost? Why not? Well, what's wrong with that? And they compared it to, like, why can't a black actor play Freddy Krueger, or why can't he play Hannibal Lecter? You know, those types of questions. And Bernard took that back to the producers, and he just ran with it. Like, he's like, there's no problem with this. Stop trying to get in the way with my movie. And, you know, it ended up being this influential. There was a lot of criticisms after the movie came out about, you know, the review saying that, oh, this movie has a lot of negative aspects towards black people. But after researching this movie and knowing that Bernard Rose actually visited the real Cabrini Green and took it to the NAACP, he was very cautious and very aware of how to portray black people. And like I said, it made me fall in love with this movie even more.
Wow, that's crazy that he would have to do that in 92, or I guess the filming was in 91, when, you know, that wasn't that long ago. It was right under 30 years ago. And, you know, by that point, things are supposed to be, of course, a lot better where that's not an issue. So, shows how far we've come from, Night of the Living Dead, where again, you had a black lead and people weren't happy about that in 68. And now in 91, you're having to, kind of get permission or get the okay to go forth.
Yeah, definitely. There was that time difference. And I guess another fun fact here I have, and I'll wrap it up with this because we're running short on time, but there was an actual Candyman killer. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, there was an actual Candyman killer. And he did his killings from 1970 to 1973. So this was before Candyman came out, and this movie wasn't even based off of this Candyman killer. His name was Dean Koval, and he kidnapped, tortured, murdered at least 28 young boys. And he was called the Candyman because his family owned a candy factory. So just knowing that there's a real Candyman and then this Candyman that's based off of the novel by Barker is very interesting.
That is crazy. And I mean, that's so near us too, right there in Houston. Wow. I don't even know what to say. I mean, a lot of times you have killers try and imitate films, but this guy was the OG. He was the original Candyman.
Yeah, no hook, nothing. He lured kids with his candy. Yeah, like you said, it was in Houston, and that's so close to us, man.
That's terrifying. I would love to hear some people that lived in Houston at the time, their thoughts on the situation, but as well as hearing, how maybe the stories of the original murders may have changed, or the perception on them after the film was released.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting point. I would love to do that research about how that had changed for them, or if they had been against the film or thinking that it was going to be about this original Candyman. It would definitely be an interesting topic, maybe for like an off week for us.
Yeah, definitely. I like to look more into it and just to read up on it, see if there's been anything ever reported of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. All right, and that's going to go ahead and wrap that section up. Let's go on ahead and get out of here.
I just want to say thank you to everybody once again. This is only our second episode, and the feedback we've gotten and the support we've gotten is outstanding. Let's keep it going. Let's get more out there. And we look forward to this bright future that we have.
Yes, very, very excited for what's to come. And if you are on Spotify or Apple Podcast, leave us a review or rating. Next week's episode, we will be reading a rating and review. So if you've left one on there, leave us some good feedback, maybe something funny. You might hear it here on the podcast. And with that, we'll go ahead and close out. How many pints of blood are you drinking?
Life sucks, and then you die.